Welcome to the NFL MVP Momentum Podcast. I'm Sam Holcroft, and alongside Payton Thompson. Before we begin, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Momentum MVP, follow our Facebook page at MVP Momentum Podcast, and check us out on YouTube at MVP Momentum Podcast. All right, so today we're going to have a little bit of a debate. Payton and I, for a few weeks now, or even back towards the draft when Jameson Williams got busted for gambling, we kind of have a little bit of a difference of opinions here, which is kind of rare because Peyton and I always kind of see eye to eye on most things. But it's about gambling and if the NFL has a gambling issue. So, as you can kind of tell by this article here, in 2018, the Supreme Court lifted a ban on sports gambling. And that wasn't just for like NFL or anything. That was just in general. Now, some states it was legal, so some people were still able to do it. But now, all 50 states in the United States are able to do sports gambling, and that is also open to NFL players. Now, the NFL rules are that you cannot bet on NFL games. You can bet on NFL events. So, for example, the golf tournament between Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Travis Kelce, and Patrick Mahomes, you can bet on that, but you can't bet on an NFL game. But some of the guys have still have still been betting on NFL games. So, PT, before I get into the big question, what's some of the reasoning that some of these players would even consider risking their careers or their pay for some betting like this?
Ask that question one more time.
What's the reason that like a lot of these guys would want to jeopardize their career or even like some loss of pay or game suspensions for some gambling? Is it really worth it?
I mean, if you're asking me what the motive is for them, I couldn't quite tell you because, the difference between someone like me and a professional athlete that has all this disposable money and other motives is really hard to understand. But if you're asking me, is there really a logical reason? I would say no, not really, because the point of sports betting is to make money. And I understand that a big part of the gambling part is the risk and the fun that comes with it. And that's really the only reason why I could see NFL players doing that. But the thing that I don't really understand about that is that you can gamble in other things and not NFL at all, as far as like games and whatnot. Like you can bet NBA, NHL, soccer, all that kind of stuff, baseball. And so it doesn't really make much sense to me why they would still choose to bet in the NFL, being in the NFL, and especially like in times like this where, your digital footprint is tracked everywhere. Like if someone wants to find that and someone wants to know what you've been doing and they're good at it and they have tabs with you like the NFL does and they have people that work on things like this, then they're going to find out. And so it doesn't really make much sense in a rational, way, but the only way that I can really describe it is that it's high stakes risk, and that's really it. That's all that's to it. It just doesn't really make sense to me why they would choose to bet in the NFL specifically, knowing the risk that comes associated with it.
Yeah, I don't do any sports betting in particular, but I know that some guys, are really well into it. I mean, we have some friends that do it quite a bit, and I mean, you can get some good payouts if you do the right bets. But when you're in a position like them, it's kind of like, why even jeopardize your career? I mean, we'll talk about some players later on about how they may not even be playing in the NFL anymore because of this, and they had some decent spots on some teams. So, so we can go right into it, PT.
Yeah.
Does the NFL have a gambling issue?
No, the NFL does not have a gambling issue. I think, the past, see, when did the Calvin Ridley thing happen? 2020, I believe. And so, with that happening, I think that was really the first big gambling bust to happen, at least recently. And so that happened. And then I really do think that with his 1 year suspension, along with many fines and team conduct punishment and things like that, I do think the NFL set an example out of him because I think 1 year in the NFL for a wide receiver that's in his prime is a lot of time. And you look at different suspensions for different things. The Deshaun Watson scenario, PEDs, different kind of incidents that happen outside of the field. You look at all those different instances and you see the suspensions, and then they're for the most part they're pretty on the lighter side. I think obviously every situation is different, but I think for the most part we see suspensions anywhere from 4 to 8 to maybe 10 games. I think what Deshaun got 9, and that was a very very specific situation. And so when you look at how many games are in a season, that's doubled what Calvin, or that's half of what Calvin Ridley got for his gambling. And so I really do think that players know the risk that comes with it. And so now recently you've had the 4 Lions players come up, specifically Jameson Williams, Williamson, who's their first, or was it second round draft pick last year. He's a high pick basically.
Yeah.
He was slotted to be a top 2 receiver before he had the injury in Bama, but he can still come back and be a great player. And it's very interesting to see a player of his caliber come out and do that right away, being a young player. Calvin Ridley in his situation, he had been in the NFL for already 3, 4, 5 years at that point. So he had kind of been a veteran at that point in the game, and also been vetted by some good vets. You look at Julio Jones and Matt Ryan and those kind of guys. And so it's kind of interesting to see a younger guy get into it. But then when you look at that situation specifically, you see those 4 Lions players and then one player from the Commanders, I believe. And so I'm not sure exactly if, it was just a coincidence between those 4 guys or if it was kind of a team thing that they kind of all got into. But it's not something that you really see that often, man. And then when you do, it's times like this where players are grouped together. Maybe it's just kind of a group thing, and you look at the size of how many a 53-man roster is, to have only 5 guys in the past 3 years in the NFL of a league this big. I think is pretty minute to the big scale of a lot of different things that could be happening. I think just as easily you could say there's drug abuse problems, there's health concern problems, just as easily as you could say there's gambling problems in the NFL. So I definitely think it's something that we need to keep track of, but at the same time, I do think that the NFL set an example with Calvin Ridley and these other guys as well, and I don't see it happening super common in the future, especially because there's so many different ways now in 2023 that you're able to see that. And then obviously there's going to be whistleblowers and people that are trying to get guys in trouble, or not trying to, but they're going to be able to find guys that are getting into stuff they're not supposed to be getting into. So no, I don't think there's a gambling problem. And if there is, I think there's bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, definitely. If the NFL had cameras and microphones in every single room in the United States, I mean, a lot of suspensions would be happening. PEDs, DUIs, a bunch of stuff that would contract detrimental to the league, a bunch of stuff. But the best way to stop a problem is to prevent the problem. So it doesn't matter that there's only a handful of guys that have done it so far. The fact that there is a handful of guys, and yeah, there are a few teams that kind of have a few, especially the Lions being the main team. Um, it can grow, because I can guarantee these aren't the only guys that have been doing this. There's some guys that haven't gotten caught yet. There might be another batch of suspensions and releases coming in the next few months once teams figure it out. I don't know how you can kind of get away with it if like you change your name, or I don't know how sports betting works on the phone,
Mm-hmm.
but like just kind of like just be anonymous somehow. Um, but yeah, you got to nip it before it becomes an issue. But I mean, they've literally come out and said like can't bet on NFL games, and if they still are, then it's like, how can you stop that? Then you just got to stop them from sports gambling in general, and that's not something that I want to see, because like if they play in the NFL, they want to bet because baseball, there's games every day. If you want to bet every day on baseball games, by all means, but you just got to know what you can and can't do. And when you're in a position like Jameson Williams, he was the 12th pick in the draft technically 2 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and he had his ACL injury. He came and played like 3 or 4 games maybe, and now he's suspended the first 6 games of next season because of this. Um, and it's it's tough. And then we also had 4 other guys get caught earlier this week, actually, and with Isaiah Rogers, Rashad Berry, Demetrius Taylor, and Nicholas Petit Freer. Hopefully, I said that name right. And I believe just Rogers and Berry were waived after the fact. So, I mean, so let me ask you this, PT. What's more of a bigger deal, a problem or an issue? Which one would you say like is higher up?
I
Because
guess
I
I
mean,
need a more specific example.
so if like for example, if someone drinks a lot, when like is an issue more severe than a problem, or is it vice versa?
I guess I'm just not understanding the difference between a problem and an issue. It sounds like they're the same
Gotcha.
thing to me.
Yeah, I'm
Are you
trying to
talking
see
about
if
like what causes the problem, or are you taling about because
no. I was just
like
wondering
in this
which
specific example? What do you mean in this specific example?
I in this specific example, I was just wanting to know which one was more severe, because
As
maybe
far as the NFL, what are you comparing it to? As far as the NFL and gambling,
like I was just wondering if an issue and a problem are two separate things, which one would be more severe? Like which one is like
what sounds worse? A problem.
yeah, a problem sounds worse.
I think so.
Okay. Okay. So in so then I wouldn't say the NFL has a gambling problem. I might have worded it that way earlier, but they probably have an issue. So it's to the point where like just punishing people may not do the job. Now, a year-long suspension that could deter people away. But what did we have last year while all these players were betting on NFL games? We had someone serving a year-long suspension. Now that was just one person. So maybe like with all these guys not only getting year-long suspensions, or in Jameson Williams' case, 6-game suspension, but some of them are actually losing their jobs and getting waived. So hopefully this will deter guys from betting on NFL games, because at the end of the day, the juice is not worth the squeeze.
Hmm.
Especially when unless if you're making millions of dollars, which that would be crazy. Um, I don't think it's worth it, because like you're already
Right.
making at least $1 million in a salary typically.
Right. Yeah, I would say a couple things before I want to ask you a question that relates to that question. A couple things I want to go over is like one, and I don't know contractually if they're allowed to do this, but if you want to gamble so bad in the NFL, why don't you just wait till you retire? You know, if you're not going to have a super long career, let's say, you're a rookie at 23, you play for a decent sized career. I'm sure it depends on the position and, all that kind of stuff. But let's just say it's about a 7 year career, you're done by 30. You can still bet on NFL games the rest of your life. It's not like your life is over at 30. And you can do that legally and make a lot of money because you know what you're talking about, at least, and not get in trouble for it. The second thing I want to talk about is I think it's definitely interesting on the point because when you talked about an issue, right, and you talked about how something can spiral out of control and get much, much worse. I think one of the biggest things that we're not really talking about is how accessible it is to people now. It's all over social media. You can just, download it from the App Store, put in a couple, information log and you're good to go. You can start doing it. And these kind of apps, they make it very flashy to get on and just do all these things. And it looks very fun and, like a casino. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it makes it kind of a little bit of a trap in that way. So I think when you talk about, yeah, there may be a little bit more, quote unquote security, in kind of knowing what guys are doing when they're in the NFL. At the same time, it makes it all so much easier in this day and age to do it. And so it's kind of a swing of the sword in that way. But what I wanted to ask you, as far as this debate goes, is what would you say is a good way to be more proactive than reactive as far as punishment? Because when we talk about what they're allowed to do and what different teams would be willing to do in situations like this, and obviously it comes down to the player, I think, too, because if you're if you're a guy that's probably not going to be a guy that gets a whole lot of snaps or even plays at all, you're probably going to get cut because it's just not worth for the team to take on your headache. But when you talk about maybe if a higher caliber player is doing it, then it makes it a little bit tougher because if you don't want to lose out on that guy being on your team, even though this happened. Um, and it's probably going to hurt the culture of the team. But not only that, but that potentially a division rival or just, a conference rival in general could pick up that same guy and he could come back to bite you in a year later. So it makes it really tough in that aspect based on the player. So what do you think would be a better punishment to be more proactive than reactive? All right,
So
go ahead.
so the way that's a hard question to attack because it's like how what preventative measures can you do other than previous punishments that guys have done? It's hard to kind of like it's hard to de-incentivize doing it. So there's no really right way to go about it. I don't know what the NFL would do, but what I would probably have to do is because here's the thing. Let me ask you a question now. If Patrick Mahomes gets found that he bet on an NFL game, does he get a year-long suspension?
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah, and see, yeah, now you're getting into weird, like, you're getting into business decisions now for the
Mm-hmm.
NFL.
So you just either A, hope that your system that you have in place works and that these year-long suspensions are going to deter people. But if you come to a case where like a Patrick Mahomes or someone big like that does do it, then what has to happen is they have to allow betting on NFL games as long as it's not their own game.
Hmm.
That's what it might have to come down to. But then the issue I see with that because there's no right or wrong answer. Because then here's the thing. Let's say I'm on the Panthers and I'm good friends with Josh Jacobs on the Raiders. And I'm like, hey, Josh, just so you know, I bet for you to get less than 79 and a half yards. Can you help me out? Because that's the last leg on my parlay. And I'll get like 100 grand and I'll give you like 10 of that. He's like, say less. And then you get some kind of BS stuff like that. Now,
Yeah.
would some players do that? Yes. Would some players not? Probably most of them probably wouldn't. They'd probably be like, I
Mhm.
don't care. Or so it's
Yeah, yeah. And most
like
players probably wouldn't want to risk their integrity of relationships doing that either.
right, exactly. But that's just one way that I could see things kind of going. Um, but it's
Let
tough.
me let me ask you this. What if they had contract agreements and like from next year until now? I mean, well, yeah, because you can't really do that because there's so many existing contracts. But what I was going to say is you could have written in agreements that if you get caught betting, you're losing your salary or a certain percentage of your salary for that year. and then you still get your other years. It would probably just have to work um, like a player sitting out. They wouldn't get paid, but their contract would get pushed 1 year down, so the team doesn't lose the flexibility.
Yeah, I could see something like that happening.
Mm-hmm.
And to the point where like I mean, Calvin Ridley got an indefinite suspension. We didn't know it was going to be a year long, but the NFL has
Mm-hmm.
kind of decided like a year long is a good um, punishment for gambling or betting, whatever you want to say. But yeah, I just feel like I don't know. It's really it's tough because sometimes I mean the right action can be no action.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean I could say that uh, the NFL has a gambling or issue or problem, but like I mean like I said, I don't really have an answer other than if you have a big name like a Patrick Mahomes where you just have to let it slide, you know, and you can't just let it slide for him. You got to let it slide
Mm-hmm.
for everyone.
Right, yeah, because it sets a bad example if someone gets caught at a caliber like that, and then you don't do anything, then everyone else is like, dude, what? Like, if it would have been us, it would. So,
Yeah, like all these guys like Amari Rogers and so a lot of those other Lions guys just
hmm
they're just like okay, well, great, nice.
yeah,
We got a year long suspension, and this guy gets a slap on the wrist, and now rules are changed. So
right, yeah, exactly, yeah, because it's not like at this point the punishments have already been handed out. It'd just be a really bad look to basically move the goalpost, no pun intended, but it's
yeah,
just you just can't do that.
yeah. And this article right here that I'm showing is kind of really interesting with all the guys that have been suspended for gambling. Josh
hmm
Shaw in 2019, then there was Ridley in
So
22.
Ridley was 22. That
Well,
doesn't
he
seem
was
right
suspended.
though.
He was suspended for the 22 season, but he was suspended in 21.
Okay, gotcha.
And then Jameson Williams, C.J. Moore, uh, Quintez Cephas, I believe.
hmm
He got released. Stanley Berryhill, Shaka Tony, Nicholas Petit Freer, Isaiah Rogers, and then Rashad Berry, I think. Oh, and then Demetrius Taylor. So those were all
So
the
there's been a
guys,
couple more guys we didn't necessarily know about because they just weren't known players, you
right?
know?
Exactly. Like some of those guys, I hadn't heard their names, except for maybe on draft night,
Right.
you know, like,
hmm
or maybe just scrolling through Madden and having to pick them up on a team or something.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Just like one's here or there. Yeah.
yeah, but the moment that a big name gets caught, NFL is going to have to contemplate what they're doing because, you know, like Patrick Mahomes misses a game, Chiefs attendance might go down a little bit. Chiefs fans love their Chiefs, but do they really think that they're going to have that great of a season with the roster that they have without Patrick Mahomes?
Right.
It's
Well,
going to
not
be
even
tough,
just that, but people are just not in general gonna want to watch the games.
right?
Because it's like let's not even just Patrick Mahomes because I feel like that's the super extreme. Let's look at maybe a mid level tier quarterback. Let's look at Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins gets caught like it's I don't know. It's probably it's a really big thing probably still, but I can still see him getting the regular 1 year. I think it really just becomes a business issue when it's like a very very high caliber player. I feel like if it was like, okay, let's say different position. Let's say it's an offensive lineman. Let's say it's like some right guard who starts, but he's probably like a mid-level starter. Like he probably still gets the same punishment because he's not the team. But if it's the quarterback, like that's the head of the snake, and so
Yep.
that's where a lot of teams start and end.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we haven't seen either is like we've seen a lot of like position players that, or even in some cases, I think some linebackers, but we haven't seen a quarterback get caught yet. So the moment that's when it could get real interesting because like any team loses their starting quarterback to an injury or not, like that changes the philosophy of the team for the most part.
Hmm.
So it could get real interesting if there's a big name or a quarterback that does get caught in the next year or two. But hopefully, everyone's learned their lesson after all these guys have gotten caught.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, like you said, I mean, I don't see it ever completely ending, and there's probably guys that are doing it right now, but hopefully it's just more rare, you know.
yep. Is there anything else you need to add?
Nah.
All right. Good conversation. I'm hoping that the NFL can limit this as much as they can. But like I said, there's really no right answer to do it. You just got to just hope that what you're doing by punishing them is enough. So
Yep.
once again, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Momentum MVP. Follow our Facebook page at MVP Momentum Podcast. Check us out on YouTube at MVP Momentum Podcast. I've been Sam Holcroft.
I'm Payton Thompson.
Thanks for listening.